Hello, and welcome to Apologetics 101. I am your host, Christian apologist Brian Keith Bowen, and we are going to be interviewing Nathaniel Jeanson today on the subject of evolution. I'm calling this video Evolution Defined and Defeated. And so we're going to be, keep in mind, this is going to be basically a very generalized overview, like maybe a 500-foot overview of evolution and discussing some of the problems with evolution and stuff like that. But as we're moving forward into this as we're doing videos for chapter 2, I'm going to be zeroing in on specific arguments and specific objections that they make and claims that they have and things like that for the rest of the chapter 2 of Genesis. So I'm going to be targeting a lot of very specific issues and arguments and bringing other relevant experts on there. Of course, Dr. Jeanson's relevant expertise is in biology. So most of what we're going to be covering is in biology, but we're going to deal with a little bit of other stuff, but it's not going to be anything major because I plan on going much more further into those and hopefully getting some more relevant experts on there to talk about particular issues and arguments dealing with other things that evolutionists claim. Because you got a view that tries to argue from multiple disciplines. And so we're going to have to bring in people from as other areas of expertise that can be able to discuss certain things and certain issues and certain arguments that they make. But for this particular video, Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson is going to talk about evolution, mostly from the biological and also genetic portion of it and that sort of thing. And we're going to be discussing those kinds of things and issues involving origin of life, the origin of information. We're going to deal a little bit with their claims of abiogenesis. And so, like I said, we're going to be dealing with a lot of these issues much more specifically as time goes on. But I wanted to do kind of a general video that can kind of give you the overlay of defining evolution and the problems associated with evolution, and then we can cover more specific stuff as we move forward. All right, without further ado, let's dive in. Well, hello, and welcome to Apologetics 101. Let me adjust my camera real quick. Yeah. I am your host, Christian apologist Brian Keith Bowen, and welcome to the Genesis series, a big series I've been doing on my channel for a while. Today, we are discussing the subject matter of evolution. And we got here Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson from Answers in Genesis, a biologist from Answers in Genesis. And well, how are you doing, Dr. Jeanson? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me on, Brian. I've been with Answers in Genesis about 8 years. Before that, I was about 6 years with family. Went to so I was homeschooled through 8th grade, went to a small Christian high school, graduated from there, went to University of Wisconsin Parkside, which the alums affectionately call the dark side. But it was a great program with a high faculty to student ratio, and was able to do a lot of research there, get a lot of experience there. Went off to Harvard to do a PhD in cell and developmental biology and graduated in 2009. And that was also the same year I joined the Institute for Creation Research, and have been doing creation research then. So about comes out to about 14 years, I think, in August of doing that, and now it Answers in Genesis.
Awesome. All right. I guess we'll just jump right into our subject matter here. I thought we could start out with a definition of of evolution. And this one's going to be kind of a little bit tricky because evolution can mean different things to different people, and this has often led evolutionists to accusing young Earth creationists of strawmanning us or strawmanning them, and evolution is kind of being used as kind of an umbrella term for different views. And so, I guess the way I wanted to approach this is for you, in your own words, give us a definition of evolution. And obviously, this is probably going to lead us into what we really disagree with, which is common descent. And and we'll probably get into the definition that evolutionists usually give, which usually the evolutionists will give one that says like it's a change in population over time, and a very generic type of definition for evolution. And of course, young Earth creationists agree with organisms changing over time. And that reminds me, I've got your book here too, Dr. Jeanson, Replacing Darwin. I've been reading it ever since I got it a few days ago. And I'm really impressed with the arguments that you made in that book, especially with your analogies. I thought your analogies were really, really good. But in any given case, so go ahead, give a robust definition of evolution in your own words. What is the issue there, and then and cover what you think about the definition that's given usually by evolutionists on evolution, and whether you think they are equivocating between these definitions, because obviously there's some things that we agree with and there's things that we disagree with, and our issues not really over organisms changing necessarily, or even with speciation, because we'll get into that, but because we don't hold to fixity of species. But in any given case, in your own words, give us a definition.
Evolution has a number of different definitions, which opponents of creation science exploit. I can talk about my own thinking on the origin of species having evolved with time, which, how can a creationist say that? Well, it simply means they've changed and expanded or contracted, whatever. It just means change. So you don't believe in evolution, you don't believe in change. Well, of course I believe in evolution. In that sense, change happens. So no one actually disagrees with change happening. But the concept that's attached to that word in schools, public schools, universities, the wider scientific discourse as a general rule, and the definition where all the debate is, relates to the explanation for the origin of all life on Earth. Did it evolve? Meaning, did it arise by strictly natural processes over incomprehensible amounts of time from a common ancestor, or does something else better explain all the diversity and unity of life that we see today? So that's another definition. And there's many more we could give in between those two, but that's one aspect of it. And evolutionists can, again, define it in even more ways than that. Simply for change, they can give a technical sounding definition for change within populations, change within frequencies of certain genes, basically the frequency with which the genetic instructions exist in this population versus that population, and so on. So it's a whole host of definitions wrapped up in a single word. So how can someone make sense of it? The fact that there's this confusion is an aid to someone who's trying to persuade the general public that evolution is true, because they can switch definitions mid-argument and make it sound more appealing than it is. But for our purposes, the debate where the rubber really meets the road, the debate over this concept where creationists, evolutionists disagree, where there's court decisions, all that revolves around the explanation for the origin and diversity of life on Earth. How did all this life, how did all these species come to be? That's where the debate is. Everyone agrees that change happens, but did it all come from a common ancestor through strictly naturalistic processes over billions of years, or is something else a better explanation for all that? That's what creationists and evolutionists disagree on and debate so vigorously about.
So the real issue is not that organisms change over time, because we would agree that organisms change over time. The real issue is the kind of changes that are being claimed, the direction of change that's been claimed by the evolutionists. the issue is going to be over common descent. And I don't think you mentioned this in your definition, but common descent, common ancestry, uh, all life is related kind of thing. That's going to be an issue because you're essentially saying like that the banana and us are essentially related. Now, evolutionists would argue that they don't think bananas are closely related to us, but they would say that they are related to us in some sense.
Yeah, so part and parcel of the larger overarching evolutionary explanation is the common family tree among all forms of life, from bacteria to brachiosaurs to beetles to everything else. But again, the issue is not, does change happen over time? I mean, my own slowly graying hair shows that I've changed over time from how I used to look. No one disagrees with that. No creationist disagrees with that. The question is, does change over time explain everything that we see, or could other processes, other actions, for example, miracles, acts of God speaking the universe into existence?
Okay, so you do agree that evolutionists do equivocate on the word evolution, that they equivocate between the definitions. So they'll go for something
and likely deliberately. I mean, it's a debate tactic for a reason, because it works, because you can, I would say, mislead people by deliberately changing the definition mid-argument.
All right. So evolutionists equivocate between the definitions, like they'll go from what we will agree with, because we will agree with. I guess we can go ahead and touch on this. Natural selection. We would agree with natural selection. Of course, we would argue that natural selection is a representative of a loss of information, not a gain. Um, uh, they will like define, because they define natural selection as evolution essentially. So essentially, it's like they're defining natural selection, which we agree with, but then they'll move to common descent, which we don't agree with. And so you see this kind of going back and forth. And as soon as we attack this and say no, this isn't, this is not evolution, and that sort of thing, and then they say no, you're straw manning us. But in reality, they're equivocating between their definitions as a result. Now they may believe that that these changes, these type of changes within a population eventually becomes, major classification of creatures, but then that's what they have to demonstrate, and simply assuming that and then accusing us of straw manning is not good. All right. Okay, tell me about the history of this. So this was founded by Charles Darwin, correct?
Yes, up into his time, and I'd say there's really a progress, foundations laid down for him to be able to argue for his thesis. One of the key ones being, before he even wrote Origin of Species, published in 1859, there was already a movement in the scientific community, a consensus developing that the Earth was much older than 6,000 years. And for evolution to work, ever since Darwin, evolutionists have argued that evolution happens very slowly, almost too slow to observe. And they would say, but it's still possible because we have millions of years. So if you didn't have that development prior to Darwin, this concept of millions of years of Earth history, I don't know that he could have pulled off what he did. So that's one of the key undercurrents that I think creates the circumstances that allowed Darwin to publish On the Origin of Species in 1859. A second undercurrent that I have found fascinating that led to the conversion, in a sense, of the scientific community of his day over to his position was social in nature. So if you look at On the Origin of Species, and you can do this online because they put all the editions for free online. You look at the first edition, 1859, versus, I don't remember which it was, the fifth edition, perhaps 1869. The dates are what matter. It's 10 years later. there's a key sentence that changes in his book. 1859, he knows he is challenging the scientific consensus of his day. And so he has in one of the chapters sort of a preemptive rebuttal to his critics, saying, I know most of you, I know you'll ask me, why do the vast majority of scientists disagree with you? If what you're saying is correct, why do so few people agree with you? And so he gives his reasons for why he thinks it's time to change the consensus. That sentence changes in the 1869 edition, and he says, why until recently did everyone disagree with me? So within 10 years, he flips the consensus. And what even non-creationist historians have identified as a key social factor in this transformation occurring was the social nature of doing science at that time. He happened to live in an era where science was transitioning from being a hobby of the wealthy who could just do it in their free time to an actual paid profession. These were the up-and-coming younger generation. Darwin explicitly appealed to this younger, up-and-coming professional science generation, and this is, I think, what carried him forward. It's worth asking what it would take for another scientific consensus shift to happen of a similar magnitude, and if it's even possible, with there being so much money and budgets and finances and a whole social fabric now revolving around this professional aspect of science. But I find that history fascinating and interesting to see that even non-creationist historians recognizing all that was at play and the circumstances that gave rise to the apparent success of his thesis at that time.
Right. And if I understand correctly, and I think you even talked about this in your book as well, Charles Darwin knew very little about genetics, and genetics was even really a field of study at the time. So, and you said that the genetics really needs to preclude the fossil evidence if we're talking about hereditary and genes passing on and things like that. Is that correct? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, and that's a whole other interesting circumstantial element to this debate. We could ask the question, in a sense, retrospectively, would circumstances have turned out different if Darwin and his contemporaries had access to the fields of science that we have today? And just for context, because it's hard to imagine a different world than what we live in now, even for me. If you read a genetics textbook, or even if you take a freshman college biology course, you're going to learn about Gregor Mendel. That tends to be where the story of genetics starts. He's writing his work several years after Darwin publishes his book. Now, Gregor Mendel doesn't know anything about DNA and the double helix and how this controls heredity. He's simply trying to understand what happens if these two parents have children and what are the principles that dictate which traits get passed on from parent to offspring. So his basic observations, well-controlled experiments with pea plants, are still several years in the future when Darwin writes his work. So we've got 100 years to go from the time of Darwin up until the time of the discovery of DNA as the physical basis of heredity. So that's how far away Darwin was, and the entire field of science. This isn't saying he was stupid. That's how little the whole field of science knew about heredity. Now, why does that matter? The central aspect of evolution, the key plank of the evolutionary explanation for all life on this planet for species, is the idea of common ancestry, that species are related. Well, the only direct scientific record of a species' ancestry is its DNA. That's what gets passed on. We can say that confidently now. No one would have been able to say that with any degree of certainty. Or you can ask the question, would anyone even have thought of saying DNA, period, as the possible place where the heritable instructions for species lie? Who knows? Now we can. Darwin had no access to it, neither did his contemporaries. So given the importance of genetics for understanding who is related to whom, that's the question of common descent. And when they form, where they form, all these critical questions that are related to Darwin's thesis that he proposed in 1859.
All right. I want to ask you about abiogenesis and the origin of life. Just for clarification, Charles Darwin actually doesn't talk about abiogenesis in either of his work. From what I understand, when I researched it a while back, because I actually thought that that abiogenesis originated with Charles Darwin. I actually come to find out that in one sense it does. He suggested it in a letter or something like that, and then and a lot of neo-Darwinists kind of picked that up and started claiming that life spontaneously generated, or not spontaneously generated, but they over millions of years that life came from non-living material. But this was a similar argument for spontaneous generation at the time. Um, do you want to talk about abiogenesis? And then I'm going to also be asking you about the origin of life, because that's in my opinion, the origin of life is a massive problem for evolutionists. But evolutionists will claim that this is an irrelevant topic matter, mainly because this is, of all the problems wrong with their evolution, this is one of the few that they will admit is a problem. So that's one of the reasons why they want to try to brush it under the rug and act like it's irrelevant. So I guess a couple questions there. What do you think on abiogenesis and the origin of life? And I probably would want you to kind of walk a step, because you start talking about this in your book about what would be necessary for life to actually begin. I mean, because a lot of evolutionists think that, or at least they used to, scientists used to think this, that all you have to do is get the right ingredients in the right place and just add water, just like a soup mix. Just get all the ingredients, add water, and then and but that's they find out life is a lot more complicated than that. That it takes a lot more. So um I want you to see if you can walk us through the original life issue, and any problems you think that associated with the abiogenesis that's often propagated by neo-Darwinists.
Yeah, so Darwin himself, let's consider some of the history and then what I can speak to and what I can't speak to. Darwin himself doesn't really address the issue, and that practice has been adopted frequently by evolutionists to this day. His interest was, starting with the premise of getting some sort of primordial life. Can you then expand and diversify and develop all the species that we see today from that, just by strictly naturalistic processes? And one of the main things Darwin wanted to show in his book, one of the main concepts that he attacks, is the opposite, that all species were created in their current form by God in their current locations, which, just a little bit of reflection on the biblical account shows that concept to be highly unbiblical anyways, but that's what he's attacking. And so long as he can knock down that alternative concept and buttress the evidence for simply change happens and species have migrated, he's well on his way. However, if you're going to explain the origin and diversification of species strictly naturalistically, it begs the question, how did that first life come to be? And given all the premises that have been adopted by the mainstream scientific community and the arguments they've advanced to keep creation science out of the discussion, they're stuck having to deal with this question of how life arose and to explain it in strictly naturalistic terms. Now, my book, Replacing Darwin, is titled as such for a number of reasons. One, because the central aim of the book is to not just rebut evolution, but to give a superior alternative. And there's historical reasons for that. It goes back to legal decisions. And in terms of the overall arguments against evolution, I also try to position it to complement what else is out there. In terms of anti-evolutionary arguments, for example, here's why evolution is impossible. Here's why it can't work. Here's why you can't produce this many species with strictly naturalistic processes. Michael Behe's work, Darwin's Black Box, is one of the most airtight arguments I've ever read against it. And Behe himself, Catholic, is fine with common ancestry, fine with humans and chimpanzees having a common ancestor. He's fine with billions of years of history for the universe. And even though I disagree with him on those issues, I feel like that actually, in a sense, helps the argument in the sense of I'm not, yeah, that book. I'm not arguing from an ally per se. He's almost a hostile witness. He disagrees with the mechanism of evolution, says you can't do that. He's an advocate of intelligent design because he says you can't produce certain structures by the mechanisms Darwin proposed, or even what neo-Darwinists propose. And by Darwin's own standard, this is a direct falsification of evolution, and it should be discarded. With respect to the origin of life, there's a book I read growing up and seen presentations on it called The Mystery of Life's Origin, again from the intelligent design community, which is again a broad tent group of individuals who are not necessarily holding to a young earth, even to creationism, let's say, in some form, but reject Darwinian evolution and at play that make it essentially impossible for life to have arisen, the type of life that we see today, to have arisen, shut case, because we're pre-self-replicating molecules, pre-self-replicating life. Only chemistry and physics are what's at play, and the laws of chemistry and physics essentially forbid the spontaneous formation of the first cell, the first self-replicating molecule. It's a difficult problem for them to solve.
All right. So would you say that it would be very difficult to try to get life from non-living material? That it's not just as simple as just getting the ingredients together. That's only part of the problem. It's much more fundamental, and you actually talk about this in your book on you to get the you mentioned second law of thermodynamics. What is your position on that? Because I know a lot of young Earth Christians bring up second law of thermodynamics. You think it needs the energy to start it? You mentioned a snowball analogy with the and having a dirt mound in front of it and trying to push it up it initially, and once you go downhill it'll be fine. But what is your view on that, on getting life started, and what it would take to make that happen? And also another thing that I think life would also need is the language system of DNA. You talk about that in your book as well. And so yeah, I actually love the way you described it to a blueprint. That's perfect analogy for DNA. So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so with respect to the origin of life, because we're talking about the time before we have self-replicating systems, you can't invoke natural selection because that requires reproduction. So we're pre-natural selection era. What is most relevant are the laws of chemistry and physics. That's not my specialty in particular. Others have written on this. The Mystery of Life's Origin is a book I read growing up. I've seen lectures based on it. Very strong argument based on chemistry and physics, saying these laws that we take for granted and have been established over years of experimentation effectively refute the naturalistic origin of life. And in honest moments, evolutionists will say, I think the best they'll say is, this is still a problem we're trying to solve. I don't think they'd admit it's a challenge to evolution, but it most definitely is, because if you can't get the first self-replicating molecules, the first self-replicating cell going, how can you get anything thereafter? So very strong anti-evolutionary argument that, again, in quiet moments of honesty, the evolutionist will admit is a challenging problem and remains unsolved to this day.
Right. Also, I'll say, if evolutionists claim that evolution is a step-by-step process, which they do, so this is not a straw man, that they claim it's a step-by-step process, then you have to be able to justify that first step. You can't just simply start in the middle and then work your way from there. You have to justify that first step if you're claiming this is a step-by-step process.
Absolutely.
What about we often accuse evolutionists of no naturalistic mechanism by which to add new information, because mutations, they think, a lot of evolutionists think mutations will add new genetic information to the genome, but that's not actually true, does it? All the observation of mutation. I actually have a book here from I think I put it aside when I was looking for Darwin's Black Box, yeah, by Lee Spetner. And from what I understand, Lee Spetner is actually an evolutionist. He's actually not a young Earth creationist. and he actually argues for the. Is that correct?
It's been a while since I've read Lee Spentner's book, and I don't remember offhand where he stands on expertise with regards to information. What I try to show in replacing Darwin is, and just to position this in terms of argument showing that evolution can't happen, the mechanism is it runs into insurmountable hurdles. There are certain structures step as Darwin demanded or said that's how evolution works. What my book shows is, given the evidence that we see, forgetting is there a superior explanation? And my argument is, if you look at the genetic data, it fits the young earth model better, and it makes predictions that I'm continuing to evaluate, and this whole concept is still working. It meets the gold standards of science that evolutionists have laid down over decades, have used in court to try to leave creation science out of the classroom. And so there's a massive revolution ongoing on this front that puts evolution in the back seat and creation science in the driver's seat.
Awesome.
The debate over this concept, where creationists and evolutionists disagree, where there's court decisions, all that revolves around the explanation for the origin and diversity of life on Earth.
Traditional knowledge, area of expertise, so he's not as familiar as someone who specializes in it. But I just wanted to get your your responses to certain things that was said by Erika. Now, this one you might know a little bit more about, simply because it involves genetics and because you actually have worked with Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins, and you're familiar with his arguments on the 84% number that he came up with. There was one question I did have on that. On the book, Search for Adam, you mentioned 86%, but I know that he came up with 84%. So I was wondering what the 2% difference there.
I think it depends partially on which algorithm you're using, which data sets you're using. If you look at the original chimpanzee paper, I think it's the supplemental methods, they talk about, I think the percentage comes out to maybe 6%. I've done some of the math myself, and I think the total comes out to about 300 million. People talk about there's a 1% difference. Well, 1% of the human genome is about 30 million. If you're talking about, in technical terms, haploid, or the half number, total number of base pairs and such. Anyway, 30 million difference is 1%. The number is higher, and you can just look at the original chimpanzee paper where they say there are whole chunks of the human genome or the chimpanzee genome or vice versa that do not match on the other. So the history of this is they started by first sequencing the human genome by a variety of methods, a fast and dirty way, a slow and gradual way, and they came up with a good, not exhaustive, but fairly comprehensive human sequence. When they sequenced the chimpanzee genome, they busted the DNA up into billions of little pieces, assumed it would look like human, and used the human as a scaffold to try to stitch this whole genome back together, the little fragments of the electronic fragments of the chimpanzee DNA. So they get the actual chemical molecule, sequence it, which is a whole bunch of little different fragments. You got the electronic fragments, you try to align it onto the human DNA, and there's whole sections that are missing, found in one species but not the other. And if so you add those up, that's where you get a number much higher than 1%. And again, depending on which data set you're accessing, which alignment program you're using, it might be 86%, it might be 89%. I tend to use the 89%, I think is what it comes out to. This is just the number I have in my head that I think corresponds to the 2005 or so chimpanzee paper that was in Nature. So you don't even need to bring any creationists into it. It's by the evolutionists' own data, where they show there's huge chunks that define differences between humans and our supposed closest evolutionary relatives.
Right. All right. I'm going to show an argument that Erika from Gutsick and Gibbon makes. This one is on Jeffrey Tompkins' argument. And so I'm going to see what you say about it. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
To talk about is the human chimpanzee genetic similarity, which is something that you also mentioned on Revealed Apologetics, and I've actually tackled this quite a bit. I know some people who are involved in sequencing. Svante Pabo just won the Nobel Prize the other day for his work with Neanderthals. So biological anthropology involves a lot more genetics than it used to. Yeah, I was curious. Do you get your numbers there? Because I heard you mention the 80%, 84% number. Do you get that from Dr. Tompkins by chance?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I have a huge problem with how Tompkins did his work, because Tompkins doesn't weight his sequences. So a base pair length that would be, let's say, 30 base pairs long, that is 85% similar between a chimp and a human, he weights those as identical to a 30,000 99% similarity, which, as a guy who does a lot of math, I'm sure you know, is not how this is done. And I thought I was kind of crazy when I first saw that, so I double checked with some other sort of people who are involved in genomics. Again, it's not my specialty. I'm not a geneticist. I was like, am I crazy with this? And they downloaded his supplementary information, and that is correct. He doesn't weight his data, and that is, in my opinion, why he's seriously underestimating the numbers. As I'm sure, as a math guy, you would agree that that's going to give you something that's not how we compare human genomes, for instance, in a paternity test. You do full genomes and you weight the sequences.
What about the stuff that she says? What does that mean when what she's saying that she claims that Dr. Tompkins doesn't weight his sequence? I don't know what that term is actually referring to. And she's accusing him of that, and she's saying that's not how it's supposed to be done, and that's not how we do it when we do paternity tests. So, what do you think on that?
There's two things that I'd like to say, and one of them, I want to see if I can share my screen. It says I think the host.
Okay,
I guess you would have to allow me to do it. So while you're looking at that, I'll address first Tompkins himself. And I've been intimately involved in some of the responses to his work. We had one guy who was in Australia, independently wealthy apparently, and just spent his free time blasting creationists. And he was trying to run his own reanalysis, duplicate Tompkins' work. He submitted his results of comparing human genome and chimpanzee genome.
You want to try to share it now and see if we can do it?
Oh, okay. Now it lets me do it. Great. So I'll do that in a sec. First, let's think about whether or not Tompkins' methods are legit. So there's a couple stories here that I think are relevant. One is I've been at ICR when he had a critic in Australia, computer science whiz, trying to duplicate his work and saying that he got numbers that were about 99% accurate. He was only looking at sections of the chimpanzee genome. Well, he submitted his data. I went through the data that this critic submitted. I said, hold on, you've got a couple different data sets. One shows 99% identity, one shows about 80-some% identity. And then apparently in response to that, he simply deleted the data set that contradicted. I thought, that is the cardinal sin of science. You cannot simply hide or manipulate data that doesn't agree. This is crazy. Second thing I want to say about Tompkins' work specifically is it's hard to think of a more exhaustive attempt at answering this question than what he's done, using a variety of different algorithms, using a variety of different data sets. There's even been problems with the raw data itself from, I think he's getting it from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, the central repository for DNA sequence information run by the US government. I think the National Institutes of Health, perhaps. And they've had issues with their own data set. And so he's had to run it, then run it again because they had problems with their own data set. And there's been a consistent pattern that has emerged from all of this that the critics never really wrestle with. But that said, so I want to first defend his integrity and say he's got a whole series of papers where he answers the critics. He repeats it with another algorithm and the same answer keeps emerging. The second thing, though, was, and I think what really belies the, if I can say, dishonesty of the critics, is you don't even have to reference Tompkins' work at all. So I've got this table pulled up here. I'm pulling it from the 2005. This is September 1st, 2005 in Nature, initial sequence of the chimpanzee genome, comparison with the human genome. If you scroll down, in fact, on Nature now, you can pick the section you want to go to. I've gone to the supplemental information section. I'm downloading. I think it's, which document is this? 4186 4072. Yeah, so I think it's supplementary notes 2 here. Related to nucleotide substitution. Yeah, supplementary tables. And so I've pulled up here table S8. maybe it's this one then. One of these two I've pulled up. And if you go to the table of chromosome coverage, total base pairs is this column. This gets a little technical, but here's the percent that never gets aligned, percent never gets aligned. Here's the base pairs unaligned. If you start comparing these columns about the amount of DNA that matches up somewhere in humans. So if I remember right here, because I'm doing this off the cuff, and this is a whole other method they've done it for. If you compare all this, the stuff that just doesn't match anywhere in human DNA is, I think, around 6%. So my point is, you can look up in the evolutionist's own raw data, and you get something other than 99%. This is not some invention by Tompkins. It's the evolutionist's own data from the start. And when they talk about 99% identical, what it really means is, okay, if we take the chimpanzee DNA, we find the stuff that matches, we ignore the stuff that doesn't. We ignore the human sequence that vice versa doesn't match a chimpanzee. We throw all that out. We find only the places that match. Then we start running the math. Then we get 99 to 98% identical. So it's a little bit ironic that Gutsick, Gibbon, Erika is talking about Tompkins not doing the math correctly. In fact, it's the evolutionists who've been less than straightforward in reporting the results. Some of them now, what I've seen over time, I don't know if it's a reaction to Tompkins or if simply they've recognized they've been called on the carpet and they can't do this anymore. They'll say humans and chimpanzees in their genes are 99% identical, or humans and chimpanzees in terms of single letter differences are 1% identical. So they'll add technical qualifications, which implicitly then acknowledge there's whole chunks of DNA that don't match at all. And if you add those numbers in, again, the number that is in my head, because it's been a while since I've done this math, but you can look up the chapter that you referred to. I think we even have it for free online now, chapter 10, the one I co-authored with Jeff Tompkins in the book Searching for Adam. And I think he references his papers there as well. He's published some of them in the Answers Research Journal that Answers in Genesis has. Anyway, there's a long story to this. He's been, like I said, almost exhaustive in his attempts to align these two genomes and figure out exactly what is the percent difference, and has been aware of his critics' responses, answered the critics' responses, and it's the evolutionists who've had to update their initial reports to something that's, if I may say it, more honest, and without necessarily giving away the fact that there's far more than 1% different between humans and chimpanzees. Like I said, the numbers, if in terms of absolute numbers, is more like 300 million. So there's a much bigger difference than people anticipate. What I walk through in replacing Darwin is whatever the number actually is. Even if we just look at single letter DNA differences between us two, does it fit evolution or does it better fit creation? And we walk through the nitty gritty math to say, given what we know about how fast or slow DNA changes, what's the best explanation? And I show that the math doesn't work for evolution, splitting 6 million, 13 million years ago. They had to revise that number as well because of genetic data, how long ago the human and chimpanzee lineages separated. There's a whole bunch of data now coming out from humans that directly refute the timescale in particular, which has massive implications and for common ancestry. So long story short, it's the young Earth model and explanation for what we see that makes superior sense of the data and has led to all sorts of additional testable predictions, additional research that has come out since 2017. I've seen those predictions fulfilled. I've got up here behind me, Traced is the book that came out 2022, March, that fulfills a prediction that I made in Replacing Darwin, that we should be able to see the echoes of human history in human DNA if our history goes back only 4,500 years to Noah. So there's all sorts of research related to this. The bottom line is Tompkins has been very meticulous in his work, and you can just ignore Tompkins and go to the original paper itself to see that what has been preached in terms of human chimpanzee similarity does not tell the whole story, and makes you wonder if part of the story has been deliberately omitted because it's not favorable to evolution.
Right. What do you think? What exactly does she mean? What's that mean exactly? I'm not familiar with the phrase. When she says that he does not weed his data, what is she accusing him of?
I think she's saying when you take the raw data, which is broken up into little chunks of varying length, and actually, the first thing I should say is she doesn't actually know what she's talking about. She has to ask someone else by her own admission and trying to report what they say. And there's a shady history for some of the critics of Jeff Tompkins, as I've mentioned, some of them just deleting data that doesn't fit their narrative. Not exactly honest or scientific. But she's saying if you have perhaps one fragment of DNA that's 100 letters long and another fragment of DNA that's just 30 letters long, you need to acknowledge the number of letters in each segment, how much of each segment that fits. The more that I think about this, I think this critic actually doesn't know what they're talking about either, because that's precisely the error that the evolutionists have been making for decades now in ignoring the large chunks of data that don't match anywhere. Tompkins, in contrast, has been very meticulous, and the numbers he's been doing independently seem to line up with the data that's implicitly acknowledged, if you run the math, from the raw data of the chimpanzee 2005 paper itself. So she's saying how you count differences, whether you give more statistical weight to a long segment that doesn't match very well versus a short segment, it gets into the nitty-gritty of the math and how you count mismatches versus matches. And I would say you can look at Tompkins' paper, and he's again gone through all sorts of different algorithms, gone through different data sets. I don't know if there are any data sets he hasn't looked at. He's done so much work on this. And the few who've actually tried to replicate it, or the one guy I'm thinking of who tried to replicate it, I personally caught him deleting data because it didn't match, and it was unfortunate for his case, lining up with what Tompkins was saying. So for whatever reason, they don't want to report what their own data show. I think it's because there's this emotional element to it, like, 1%, we must just be kissing cousins if we're only 1% different, and it feels less close if you report a different number. If you say, actually we're 300 million DNA letters apart, you tell that to someone like, oh, wow, well, why have we been talking about common ancestry if there's that many differences between us? So I have a feeling that's what's at the root of what's going on. Why should it matter ultimately? I think because the evolutionists want to have this emotional connection for people between humans and chimpanzees. And if that number gets attacked, that emotional connection begins to dissolve.
Right. You're talking about longer and shorter reads, right? When you're talking about long and short. Okay. Yeah. I've actually heard reads. I heard Dr. Tompkins give an interview on the ICR's podcast on this. It was a very good interview, actually. I think it's called the Creation Podcast. So you can find it on YouTube. All right. So basically, on one of the things that I was thinking is that she's actually making kind of like the is-ought fallacy, the naturalistic fallacy, where the way that we've always done it is the way it should be done. Would you say that that's probably what she's doing here? Like saying, okay, we never do it this way, so therefore it needs to be done this way? Is that how you think she's going at?
What Tompkins is doing is actually the evolutionist way. He's using their own tools and their own data sets and showing, sorry, you guys aren't reporting this accurately, which again, if you look at their own published data, don't run any algorithms. This is what they report about what matches between humans and chimps and what doesn't. You get results that look like Tompkins. So there isn't some grand boogie woogie attempt by creationists to come up with something goofy. We're simply repeating and showing what the evolutionists themselves have perhaps accidentally already shown, but don't like to talk about in public.
I think I remember Tompkins saying that there was a guy by the name of, I think his last name was Bugs. I remember that because that's an unusual last name. But around the same time, they had a series of blogs out, and he came up with the same number that Tompkins did. And then he had to use a different method to try to come up with a higher number. But essentially, they're trying to justify cherry picking the data is essentially what they're doing.
I'd say yes.
Awesome. I would like to ask you, what were the arguments that you've heard other young Earth creationists use that you would probably say we shouldn't use as young Earth creationists, that this is certain arguments against, certain arguments against evolution that you would probably say that we probably shouldn't argue that. I mean, what kind of arguments would you say? And another question I wanted to ask you is if you think evolution is science, because sometimes they argue it's science. Now, of course, when evolutionists use that term, they're really talking about empirical science, and we would probably argue that it's not empirical science. Maybe you could argue something on the line of origin science or historical science, but you wouldn't be able to argue empirical science. But they want to make it look very definitive, so they argue for it being empirical science. And so, what would you say on that? And as far as arguments that that you think that young Earth creationists ought to avoid making, as far as maybe just kind of help out young Earth creationists argue a little bit better when they're dealing with evolutionists.
I'd recommend people go to answersongenesis.org, answersongenesis.org, and type in the search engine arguments creationists shouldn't use. We have a list of those. It'll be updated. Science, almost by definition, is constantly changing with time. So, and give an example of, I think, to the creationists' credit, how this works. John Morris passed away. It was a geologist, explored Mount Ararat, worked with the Institute for Creation Research for many, many years, was president. In the early 80s, I think, he went down to the Paluxy River in Texas, and there was a hubbub about whether or not you could find human footprints within dinosaur ones, which would suggest that humans and dinosaurs coexisted and weren't separated by tens of millions of years, as the evolutionists would say. He published a book on it. I think it was an atheist group or some sort of critical group went back to their own analysis of the same tracks. They said, no, you missed something. What you're calling human, you missed the edges. They're simply other dinosaur tracks. John Morris went back to the same site. He said, I don't know if they defaced it or if I just missed something initially, but I went back and re-examined it, and I could see that, no, whatever is here right now, it no longer looks human like I thought it was. So he took his book off the market. Again, because he didn't want to advance an argument that he thought was now questionable. And so this is not, he was trying to stubbornly insist on something he held too dearly. It was, he himself said, I went and looked at this. I thought I was on the right track initially. And now when I look at the data, it doesn't seem to support it anymore. So I'm taking the book off the market. This is how science works. And I think it's a testament to the honesty and the integrity of creationists to follow this sort of protocol. And this sort of process has repeated itself where we've advanced arguments. Maybe the data changes. Maybe we get new data and we say, oh, it doesn't look as strong as we thought it was. Or maybe we missed something the first time. Whatever it is, that's why we have this list. So arguments we think creationists shouldn't use. Now, what about evolution being science? Or perhaps we could ask the process, does evolution have a similar practice where they make an argument, and if it's wrong, they go back and retract it, update it, say, yeah, we were wrong? A favorite example of how I would say evolution is not science, they do not have this iterative process whereby they go back and examine old predictions, correct them, or admit, yeah, we were wrong, evolution's wrong, would be something I read from an evolutionist himself. It was Sean Carroll's book. I think it was titled Endless Forms Most Beautiful, talking about evolutionary developmental biology, or Evo-Devo, the exploration of evolutionary evidence, evolutionary mechanisms during the process of embryonic development in various species. And he was talking about what's now textbook evidence for evolution. This is now the merging of developmental biology and genetics, where they've identified different genes, there's the genetics side of things, that play critical roles in the development, I think it was of eyes, in fruit flies, in mice, and in humans. And lo and behold, there were similar genes controlling eye development in these very different species. Fruit flies have a compound eye. We obviously have not a compound eye, it looks different. So, wow, how could you have such similar genes for such very different outcomes? Has to be common descent. Must be because these species inherited the common genetic instructions from a common ancestor, proof of evolution. And Carroll tells the story saying 50 years prior, or however long it was, maybe the 1950s, a famous evolutionist had argued that such a search looking for similar genes in very different species. And this is in the pre-DNA sequence era, before we had the data to evaluate. He made a prediction scientifically based on evolution. Once we're able to do this, he said, we're not going to find similar genes among different species because they've been separated evolutionarily for millions of years. Their common ancestor lived so long ago that genetic mistakes would have happened in the interim time for so long that would have completely obliterated any similarity that once existed in that common ancestor. So humans and fruit flies, they'd say, well, once have a common ancestor, had a similar genetic code, and those lineages split and have been separated for perhaps hundreds of millions of years. And so, forget it. Forget trying to look for any similarities between fruit flies and humans. That would have long been, that long ago would have disappeared because evolutionary history is so old. Now we find similar genes. By definition, that should have falsified evolution, because they made the opposite prediction. What does evolution do? Yeah, we got it wrong, but now the opposite is true. That fits evolution. In fact, it's textbook evidence for evolution. It's amazing that this one concept can predict something. The opposite result is found out, and now evolution says, actually, this is good evidence for evolution. An idea that explains everything, meaning you can't ever disprove it, ultimately explains nothing. So I'd say that example right there shows that evolution, when pressed, is not a scientific idea. It does not adapt and grow with the evidence. It's supposed to make predictions by which we can evaluate whether it's true or false. And if predictions are made and when they're falsified, we just kind of act like that didn't matter, then none of it matters. It's not actually a scientific idea. It's an after-the-fact attempt to justify what we see. I'll actually take this a step further. Looking at the responses from the critics, PhD scientists, to this recent book, Traced, looking at human history, their response, and I put testable predictions in this book. I don't know the answers yet. I said, if what I'm saying is true, then we should find this in the future. You think the evolutionists would be very excited about going and doing experiments and disproving creation science scientifically once and for all? No, they've responded in a religious way, saying, sorry, your methods don't match the textbook. Oh, well, is the textbook a holy book? We can't question it. We can't do something different what the textbook says. That's amazing, because that's what you've accused us of doing, of having a religious book. So it's twofold, at least. They've made predictions, they've been falsified, and then who cares what we said back then? This new result is actually what evolution predicts. If you can say opposite things and both of them fit evolution, that's talking out both sides of your mouth. That just doesn't make any sense, rational sense, not scientific. And then on top of that, their own behavior in response to, I would argue, superior scientific ideas. Their defense of evolution is, by their own standards, religious in nature. It is not scientific. They are not taking up the gauntlet to do experiments and evaluate these competing positions. They simply dig in their heels and say, this is how we do it. This is the only way you can do it. This is the only way you can interpret it. Okay, well, that's what you've accused us of doing. That's what you say the priests do and the pastors do and the churches do, and say that's anti-science. Now you're embodying exactly that which you've railed against for decades. It's amazing. It's an unforced error, but it shows exactly where this debate is at right now.
Yeah, there's definitely a religious favor. I've debated lots of evolutionists, and they're so strong about this. They almost act like it's scientific heresy to deny or reject evolution. The way they act. Your reference to the fruit fly thing, I remember reading earlier this morning on your the Hawks gene, where you had the pictures of the fruit fly and the legs coming out of the antenna. So that brought that to memory when you mentioned the fruit flies one. But in any case, when evolutionists claim that evolution is a fact, how do you respond to that?
I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier. They're probably using the definition of evolution that simply means change. Well, of course, evolution is a fact if it's simply change. Again, my hair is graying. I'm changing. I'm evolving by that definition. That doesn't mean all of life came from some primordial scum billions of years ago, or that humans and chimpanzees share a common ancestor. If that's what they're trying to argue is a fact, I would strongly argue against it, saying it doesn't fit the science. In fact, the superior scientific explanation especially in the realm of genetics, is the one that is derived from the plain reading of Scripture, that God created different kinds of creatures. About 6,000 years ago, God created the first man, the first woman, Adam from dust, Eve from his side. About 6,000 years ago, all of humanity goes back to them. We do not share a common ancestor with the chimpanzees or any animal. That's the explanation that makes predictions that we're seeing coming true, that grows with the data, that fits the definition of science that evolutionists have articulated over the past 40 years. And it does so much better than evolution does.
Awesome. Also, we don't really have time to get too much into your arguments on mitochondria DNA. I plan on doing a lot of Age of the Earth stuff, chapter 5. I wouldn't mind inviting you back for that to do a full video specifically over mitochondria DNA and the mutation rates. That's an argument that you're pretty famous for, and so we'll cover that, like, later on maybe. So because we don't really have time for it right now. I do want to ask you something before you go. There's a series of articles on Answers-in-Genesis website concerning what they call young Earth evolutionists. It almost sounds like an oxymoron the way that's termed. Maybe it's intended as a misnomer, not necessarily as a meaning that they actually believe in evolution. But my understanding is that certain people, and I think you mentioned a name in a debate that's you reference him as a kind of a splinter group from young Earth creationists because of the way they behave, or the way they don't seem to use up-to-date information and that sort of thing, and they tend to interpret certain evidence as through an evolutionary lens, even though they don't accept evolution. And so could you explain that term? I didn't want to leave without discussing that at least.
Young Earth evolutionist is a term we've used because it does sound like an oxymoron, and the views that this group articulates do seem oxymoronic. They will say, we believe God created 6,000 years ago different kinds of creatures. If I give them a statement of faith from Answers-in-Genesis, they'd probably say, yeah, I agree with that because the Bible says so. Then they'll turn around and say, but the scientific evidence looks like it's strongly in agreement with evolution. That's one element of the young Earth evolution point. Todd Wood is one of the famous advocates, has a blog post, there's good evidence for evolution. And creationists look at that and say, what in the world are you talking about? How can you even say that? And there's a whole group of folks who tend to share that position. No, we shouldn't argue against evolution scientifically because there's good scientific evidence for it. And I would say, again, I'd say, what in the world are you talking about? That does not at all fit what I see. The second basis for that term, another oxymoronic element, is one of their advocates, as an example, has argued for an unusual amount of biological change, has argued for something sounding like, Kurt Wise is his name, paleontologist, has argued, put in print, a view that sounds something like God creating land mammals of certain types, Noah taking a pair of a certain type of land mammal, walking, quadruped or whatever, it moves like land mammals do, on board the ark, that pair exiting the ark, and then after the flood, diversifying, evolving into the water and becoming whales, which you step back and say, what in the world? That's what the evolutionists propose. God can do anything, but that sounds bizarre. Why would you even say that? And it's very divergent from what most creationists have been saying for quite some time. The evolutionists have a field day with this, saying you guys believe in more evolution than we do, with that sort of position, saying that land mammals gave rise to whales in 4,500 years since the flood. Again, if you can make a biblical case for it, if there's good scientific evidence for it, fine, let's consider it. But I think on both counts, that idea fails. But it's this willingness to entertain the wildest of hypotheses that just so happen to sound very close to evolution that is also part of the basis for this name for this group. It's called Evolutionists. So anti-eugenicists would argue, I would argue, that there is strong scientific evidence against evolution. So when you have a group of folks saying, no, we believe the opposite, well, we're kind of at odds then, aren't we? Because we're saying opposite things. Yet you claim to hold, not you personally, Brian, but this group would claim they hold to the same doctrinal position I do. That's hence the term, because there seems to be a great oxymoron in their position, and in fact, in their practice, seem to be opposing what anti-eugenicists and so many other creationists, myself included, seem to be trying to accomplish.
You would say that they're being very inconsistent to their own viewpoints, their own worldview, their own perception of the age of the earth, and so they're interpreting some of the evidence in light of a worldview that's not their own. It's a different type of perception of the evidence.
It's difficult to explain because it has this implicit contradiction. How can they say we believe this, but this is also true? Those don't go together. How do you make sense of Romans 1, where the things of God are clearly seen in nature? Oh, there's good evidence for evolution. Well, that would seem to argue against what Genesis is saying and against Romans 1. So how do you hold these two concepts in your head? I guess I'd leave it for them to figure that out. Answers in Genesis, I would stand back and say, look, y'all, this is nonsensical. I don't know how you reconcile it, but it's nonsensical, unhelpful, and in fact, in many respects, opposed to what organizations like Answers in Genesis are trying to accomplish, and undermines the faith, perhaps, of those who feel it challenged by evolution and are trying to figure out what to do with it.
Right. And people like Todd Wood and stuff, they don't really listen to our side as much or have updated information. Is that correct? I'm trying to remember what you said in a debate, because Todd Wood was mentioned. You said he's part of Splinter Group. A lot of theistic evolutionists have actually jumped on this and says that there's a division among young Earth creationists. Would you call this a division, or how would you describe that?
I hope there's a division, because it's opposed to what Answers in Genesis does. So how can you find unity when the two sides are rowing in opposite directions? One is saying, no, there's good scientific evidence for the young Earth creation view, abysmal evidence for evolution. And the other side says, no, that we shouldn't attack evolution. There's good evidence for it, and we should do something else instead. What in the world? So again, it's something they'll have to reconcile in their own minds. In the meantime, my advice is to other folks is watch out. This can lead you down a dangerous path. And in general, I'd say my observations of how they handle the data are, if I'm polite, very naively. They don't seem to recognize the assumptions inherent in evolutionary analyses, or really even how, if I may say it, science works. One of the things that I try to articulate clearly with a book chapter with Jeff Tompkins in that book, Searching for Adam. Again, you go to answersingenesis.org. We've got that chapter for free online. I walk about how what I learned in graduate school, how to test hypotheses. Evolution fails on so many fronts when you try to line it up side by side with creation science, and trying to find experiments that distinguish between evolution and creation science is so hard. Almost all the evidence that is cited in support of evolution fits creation science equally well. It's exactly what you predict if God created the world. So if here you have evidence that fits either side, it's irrelevant to the debate. You can't call that good evidence for evolution. It's ambiguous evidence. It doesn't distinguish between the two models. In fact, if I were to propose an experiment in which the current evidence for evolution is the result to one of my graduate school professors, and I tell the backstory here in the chapter as well, he basically failed me, saying what you're proposing is a useless experiment. You don't design experiments. And just to tell the backstory real fast, It was a developmental biology class where instead of administering tests to see if you knew the knowledge, they wanted to give you practice being professors. So you would have to write a grant proposal, a research grant proposal, propose some experiments that'll hopefully test certain hypotheses and give you some answers, then defend that with a 10-minute presentation in front of the professor in the class, then they critique it. So I proposed something, and he said there's 3 types of experiments in this world. The first type, if the experiment turns out this way or this way, you learn something. Great. Those are the best experiments. They're hard to design. They're rare. The second type of experiment is if the experiment turns out this way, you learn something great. If it turns out this way, you learn very little. Those are many experiments. And then he leaned back in his chair and he said, I think you're proposing a type 3 experiment where you learn nothing, either way the experiment turns out. So of course I felt about this tall. It was a very valuable lesson about how science works. And this is exactly what you see in the creation evolution debate. The evidences proffered by the evolutionary side are this category 3 experiment where here's the evidence. I'm sorry, but this fits this side as well. This does nothing to advance the debate. Yet somehow it's textbook support for evolution and reason to reject creation science from the classroom. And this concept does not seem to be understood by the young Earth evolutionary community.
Right. I've heard you say type 1, type 2, type 3 experiments before. It might be, I don't know if it was in Coming Grips with Genesis or Searching for Adam, but I remember you actually referencing that before. We would not regard if evolution is being understood, and this is how we're understanding it as common descent, without any equivocation, no equivocating from what we agree on to what we don't agree on, but just flat out, okay, this is the issue, common descent, common ancestry, all life is related sort of argument, then we would say that that's not a fact. That might be assumed, that might be believed, but it's just not a fact. And so that's what we would argue, right? On that.
It's the central evolutionary hypothesis, but it is not supported by the evidence. It is not a fact, despite all the protestations of the evolutionists to the contrary.
Right. Awesome. Okay. Do you want to give us any final thoughts on the matter? Something to leave the audience with, maybe a summary of your position on evolution, and then we'll end it there.
I'd say there's abundant scientific evidence in support of the young Earth creation science model. Our website, answersingenesis.org, has, I think, thousands of free articles that viewers can knock themselves out with reading. We've got resources you can purchase, ebooks, print books. The ones I've written include Replacing Darwin. That's this one back here, The Blue Butterfly. I did have a pastor read through it to try to make it accessible. It's a book I wish I had when I was in college to hand to my unbelieving classmates to say, you need to read this if you believe in evolution. Ends with the gospel. This other one up here with the green butterfly, that's Replacing Darwin Made Simple. In this case, I have more of a church audience in mind where they say, look, I just want the cliff notes of what's going on. How does species form? What's their origins relates to Genesis? And how do I use this information when engaging a person on the street? Or let's say I'm a parent and my son or daughter comes home and says, I'm not a Christian anymore. Evolution's true. I've rejected all that. How do you engage them? How do you ask questions to try to get them to think? That's what that book does. The Blue Butterfly one, Replacing Darwin, isn't as explicit in training people how to refute evolution, because I do it itself in the book. And I'm assuming the person reading it is skeptical and already knows why they believe in evolution. So I just simply rebut it. And then the last book here, Traced, came out a year ago, a little over a year ago, and focuses heavily on the human history question and seeing its signature in our DNA. That's very revolutionary. Deals with, you can trace your own genetic ancestry back to Noah with Y chromosome testing. Males can do this. If females get their brother to get a test or their father, they can follow this as well. There's so much explosive evidence there. We see in the human DNA family tree the mirror image of Genesis 10 at the base. So Genesis 10 is a genealogy of the sons of the offspring of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It's a genealogy of males. And you see that replicated in our DNA, which is profound. And there's so much more, again, on our website. We have a YouTube channel that has all sorts of videos. There's There's massive amounts of readily accessible information for anyone who wonders about this issue. So I'd urge people to avail themselves of it, to not be unprepared, for students not to be unprepared before they go off to college or public school, or whatever it is, for parents to avail themselves of this, to encourage their kids, their grandkids to read this, to watch it, because we have video forms too of this information. There's so much out there in support of Genesis 1 through 11 that verifies, that confirms the veracity of Scripture. It's tremendous to have this accessible at our fingertips, and it's an opportunity I think that people should not miss.
Awesome. And I thank you for joining us on here. I really hope to see you again when I get to do subject matter review of Earth, because I'm really interested in your mitochondrial DNA and mutation rates arguments. And I know that deep time is a major icon of evolution, so it would be cool to go over that with you and to actually be able to have time to do a full video, spelling all that out, spelling your arguments out, and being able to detail it and dealing with the objections that people have made and that sort of thing. So I appreciate it, and thank you again for joining us on there. And do you have anything additional to add before we go?
Thanks for the opportunity, Brian, for having me on.
No problem. All right. I'll see you later, and God bless. Thank you once again for joining me on Apologetics 101. I'm hoping to deal, like I said, I'm hoping to deal with much more specific and zero focused videos later on that's going to focus on specific areas of evolution. I wouldn't mind doing a video, if I can, I wouldn't mind doing a video with Michael Behe on irreducible complexity. Granted, he's an evolutionist, and obviously we would have disagreements along those lines, and disagreements along the lines of the age of Earth and things like that. But this, what makes it so interesting, is the fact that we would have these fundamental disagreements, but he's willing to honestly admit to the data at the biomolecular level. As you can see, Dr. Jeanson actually alluded to Dr. Behe's work on irreducible complexity as well. So I wouldn't mind doing a video on that. I wouldn't mind doing a video with Professor Marvin Lubenow, who wrote Bones of Contention. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I wanted to. I wanted to, but it all depends on if I can set something up with him. And I wouldn't mind, to discuss the fossil evidence more clearly. I would like to get hold of Professor Marvin Lubenow, because I know that this is his area of expertise, because he's a paleoanthropologist. So I would love to have a discussion with him on this. I would love to also have a discussion with Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins on his book and work on chimps and humans. A geneticist discovers DNA evidence that challenges evolution. And me and Dr. Jeanson talked about Dr. Tompkins' work, and I thought he did an excellent job of overviewing that and discussing the specific objections by Erika from Gutsick and Gibbon. And I'm hoping to have Dr. Tompkins on where I can discuss this directly with him. And Dr. Jeanson is correct. He's one of the best experts on the subject matter, and so Erika from Gutsick and Gibbon seemed to treat Dr. Tompkins like he's just doing it like they don't do it. But in reality, there are evolutionists that came up with the same number. It's the fact that they have to cherry pick the data in order to try to come up with the numbers that they come up with. So Dr. Tompkins isn't over conflating his number. He's actually got the accurate number down, the correct number. Than the one that is used by evolutionists, because the one that evolutionists use is actually the one that's actually conflated. And so that's obviously the way we would argue, and it's conflated because, simply put, they cherry pick the data. There's a lot of genetic information they don't use. It's kind of like what Professor Marvin Lubenow also talks about this a little bit. He admits this is not his area of expertise, but he talks about it a little bit in his book Bones of Contentions. But he did say, just from a common sense perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because you can just look at chimps and humans and say there's a lot of anatomical differences between us. And so the idea that the genetic similarity is only less than 1% or half of a 1%, it doesn't make any sense, really, from a common sense perspective. But from a scientific perspective, it is just bogus. It's them cherry picking the information, and that's what gives them that conflated number. In any given case, I'm hoping to do more discussions with more experts concerning these kind of topic matters. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This is really just intended to be, like I said, an overlay of evolution, so that we can define what the term is, talk about the where it comes from, the issues involved, the arguments, and of course problems associated with evolution. And it also gives us kind of a jumping start when we kind of zero in on some of these specifics that was discussed by Dr. Jeanson. I'm hoping to bring other experts on here to discuss that. I'm hoping to do a video on alleged bird evolution. So there's a lot of videos that I really would like to have on my channel that I've planned up or want on my channel, and there's a lot of different experts that I wanted to try to bring on here. I want to try to get paleontologists on there. I want to try to get geneticists. It's going to be so cool. I want to do an origin of life video. I know that me and Dr. Jeanson talked about that. I think that is an essential problem with evolution. Evolutionists try to, it's one of the, there's lots of problems wrong with evolution, but this is one of the ones that evolutionists will admit is a problem. But they won't, like Dr. Jeanson said, they won't admit it's a challenge to evolution, because they want to believe evolution no matter what. But they realize that they can't get life from non-living materials to come together and form life, and they realize that, and so they try to brush this underneath the rug so that they don't, that it looks like it's an irrelevant side issue. Yeah, it's interesting, it's side issue, but it we could still say evolution happened even if we can't justify that first step. That's not how this works. If you're going to claim, as evolutionists do, that this is a step-by-step process, and again, it's not a straw man, this is what evolutionists claim, that it's a step-by-step process, then you have to justify that first step. Simply starting in the middle and working from there doesn't work. You got to justify that first step. So this is a very important issue. So I'm hoping to have a video on the origin of life. I'm hoping to have a video on the origin of information. Do that as well. I wouldn't mind doing the origin of information video with Dr. Georgia Purdom, also from Answers in Genesis, because she's a geneticist, and I've been very interested to have an actual discussion, even long before I had my Genesis series. I wanted to have a discussion with her concerning the origin of information and that sort of thing, and then we can get into things like mutations and stuff like that. Me and Dr. Jeanson, talked about that a little bit and alluded to it, but we didn't really go too heavy into it as much as I would like. Like I said, I understand that he's not a geneticist. As a biologist, though, he does have to do work in genetics. But I want to get a geneticist specifically on here so that we can have that discussion. But anyway, this was a fun video. I really liked it. I enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments section what you think. Also, don't forget to hit that like button and to subscribe to my channel. We have lots and lots of videos. I know that creation versus evolution topic is a not only a fun topic, but it's a big topic. It's very controversial. You see lots of debates on this. Probably see more debates on the subject matter of evolution than you do Age of the Earth. I mean, it's quite a big topic matter. And so we're going to be dealing with a lot of issues, a lot of arguments. I'm sure I'm going to have lots of responses from atheists and evolutionists and that sort of thing. I expect that. And we'll see what happens as a result of that. I've already had responses from others. I still get responses from some of the videos that I have. If you haven't seen my video where we talk about distant starlight with Dr. Jason Lau, please do so. That video was really good. I have over 1,000 views on that one video. It's incredible. So lots of people are watching it, and it is the top video right now as far as viewed on my channel. So, and I did that video a while back, but it's still getting lots of views, and it got lots of views right off the bat. Distant Starlight, and I still have atheists that comment on Distant Starlight. I debated one recently on my channel that came in inside a response. So it's enjoyable to have these conversations. It opens the doors to so many conversations and potential videos that I might put on my channel. And so it is so awesome to have these kinds of discussions. So please subscribe to my channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Like the video. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can be alerted by YouTube whenever I load another video on my channel. And I hope to see you soon. And this is Apologetics 101 signing off. God bless.